So it gives me enormous pleasure today to be speaking to Philippa Hogan-Hearn and Lizzie Collins. And both of these ladies have been instrumental in our new exhibition, which is all about the artist Paul Mars and Winston Churchill, or Companions of the Brush, as they are known. So, Philippa, could I start with you? Would you be kind enough to just introduce yourself and to give us an idea of your background and how you came to be involved in this project?
So my name's Philippa Hogan-Hearn, and yes, I've co-curated this exhibition with Lizzie, who I used to work with many, many moons ago at Christie's. That was how we first came to know one another. And then reconnected, must have been in 2020. And Lizzie was already involved with Blenheim and doing exhibition projects with Blenheim. And she asked me, had I got any ideas for an exhibition that would relate very strongly to Blenheim Palace. Mm-hmm. And when I was at Christie's, we had a sale of some works by Paul Mars, including a charcoal sketch by Mars of Winston Churchill playing cards at Blenheim. So with that in mind, I said, well, we've got to do Paul Mars and Winston Churchill. So that's really how the idea came about.
Excellent. And thank you. And Lizzie, what's your involvement?
I guess as a gallery based in Woodstock, we've developed a relationship with Blenheim, and with the new spaces that have come up in the Palace Exhibition Suite during lockdown, there emerged an opportunity for new exhibitions for visitors to the Palace. So we were asked to come up with some ideas to curate for those exhibitions, and the remit really was to have a link to the Palace and its history, and to create exhibitions that would have a direct link in some way. So when Phil presented this idea to me, I thought, well, that is absolutely perfect. It couldn't actually be much of a closer link. So it seemed like the perfect exhibition to go in the space, especially as the rooms that we are using, the Palace Exhibition Suite, are actually right next door to the birthplace of Sir Winston Churchill.
That's
the room
very
is actually
true.
born. Yeah.
And Lizzie, is this the first venture with Blenheim? Is this your first exhibition at Blenheim?
No, it's now our third inside the staterooms, and we have also been placing exhibitions in the new Stables Cafe as well, but they're slightly different. But the ones in the staterooms are very much aimed at sort of linking to the history of Blenheim and Blenheim Palace. So the first one we did was Cecil Beaton and the Theatre, and that was linking to an exhibition that was already conceived of, showing his photographs. And when I heard about that, I was like, well, what about his paintings? Again, harking back to my Christie's days, remembering selling lots of his paintings and studies for the theatre. And I think it's unless you've encountered them or had the opportunity to encounter them, it's a lesser known body of work. So that was the first exhibition we did, and then we did an exhibition on Géricault and Delacroix, and this is our third.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to go back to you, Philippa, if I may. So can you tell me a little bit about the relationship between Churchill and Paul Mars, and how and when they met? Because I think, there's a fascinating story there that a lot of people won't have heard.
Yes, in fact, it was a 50-year friendship, which really started completely by chance. They met in the trenches in 1915. Mars was sketching because he was an artist liaison officer in the army, he was actually with the British Army. He had been rejected by the French Army on medical grounds, and he wanted to take part so desperately, he signed up with the British Army. And he met Churchill, and Churchill was fascinated with him sketching, because Churchill himself had just taken up painting that summer. And so he was sort of, it was all fresh in his mind, and he was seeing this artist, and he was like, so they had struck up a conversation, and then really met again after the war, really to do with Consuelo Vanderbilt, who'd been married to the Duke of Marlborough. And so she'd obviously known Churchill when she was married to the Duke of the ninth Duke, and their friendship was renewed. And so yes, that it really, sort of started again in the 20s and then on into the 30s and continued until Churchill's death in 1965.
It's worth stressing that Paul Mars was actually French. That's
absolutely, yes. I mean, he was a Frenchman who became an Englishman.
Yeah.
He became an Englishman really down to marriage. He married an English or Scotswoman, really, and the protocol just meant that he had to become a nationalised British subject. But if you hear him speak, he still maintained, even he speak English, he's remained that sort of slight French accent. So he was definitely, what we call him, we've adopted him really, an Anglo-French artist.
There's that lovely clip in the exhibition of him speaking and describing his meeting with Churchill. But Lizzie, I just want to come to you for a moment, if I may. Philippa, you said that they met in 1915 during the First World War. And then met several years later. But of course, Paul Mars nearly didn't make it out of the First World War. He was almost shot. And Lizzie, could you take that story up a little bit?
Yeah, so he was, being a sort of Frenchman in the wrong uniform, he was mistaken for a spy, or in the right uniform, but they didn't believe who he was. And so it was a major from the Scots Guards, wasn't it, Philippa?
The Royal Scots Greys,
yeah. The Scots Greys. It was a major from the Scots Greys who recognised him as he was being taken off to the firing range and said, "What are you doing here, Miles?" And, "Well, I'm just about to be shot," and he was obviously, he rescued him from being shot. And this chap's called Major Swetnam. And the book, A Frenchman in Khaki, his biography, is actually dedicated to him. But very sadly, Major Swetnam, who saved his life, was actually killed in action later that day. And quite coincidentally, we were holding a lunch actually at Blenheim for another exhibition we were holding in the gallery with some of our clients about 6 weeks before the exhibition, and mentioned that our next major exhibition was going to be on Paul Mars. And one of our clients at the exhibition told us that Major Swetnam was her grandfather.
Yeah. Oh, goodness.
Quite extraordinary. And so that's why we're very lucky to have the photograph of him in the cabinets.
Wow. That's fantastic. Extraordinary story. Okay, so going back to the exhibition, so very happily he made it out of the First World War, and as you say, struck up the relationship with Winston Churchill and Consuelo, and also with the 10th Duke of Marlborough, so Consuelo's eldest son. The structure of the exhibition, is there a theme? How did you decide what was going to go in which room?
So it's thematic rather than chronological.
Right.
And I mean, I suppose there's a definite logic to it in that the first room really is the artist soldier. It's Paul Mars as the artist soldier. So it starts with early works, two sketches from 1917 from the First World War, and then leads into paintings that are actually in the Duke of Marlborough's collection of Trooping the Colour, and a wonderful coronation picture and a funeral of George VI. So it's really the sort of pomp and circumstance room, the first room, yes. And then we go into Mars really loved and embraced all things British. So Henley and Cowes Week and Royal Ascot were favourite subjects of his. So the next room really focuses on that. And then the third room really celebrates the friendship, the painting friendship between Churchill and Mars. And they painted together in numerous places, but obviously Blenheim and Chartwell, but also at Consuelo Vanderbilt Bolson's country estate in Normandy, which was called the Chateau Saint-Georges Motel. And then the final room really takes us into Mars at home with his second wife, Jessie, his great muse. And that's a really domestic, room with lovely paintings of Jessie and their spaniels and still lives. And it's a real sort of at-home moment.
Yeah, and the exhibition itself, I think you've both been extremely clever. It's very light. It's sometimes you go into rooms and the paintings can seem oppressive and, a little bit, almost, they bring down your mood, but there's a lot of life and cheerfulness, I think.
I think that must come down to Paul Mars himself, really. I don't think we can take credit for that. I think every encounter I've had with him, posthumously through the literature or even through meeting his biographer, he sounds like he was, well, I think Anne Singer mentioned that he was irresistible. I don't think she'll mind us saying that. I think he was a really charming person and somebody who had a zest for life. And I think that really comes through his work. So I think his work is really positive and uplifting.
Yeah, definitely. And again, there's been mention of him having painted The Trooping of the Colour and George VI's funeral. And was he an official royal artist, and also was he an official war artist during the First World War, or was he just kind of in the right place at the right time? Do you know if he was commissioned?
I haven't read that he was an official war artist. I do see those as public art, and they're very important to our history, as a country. And I think he was probably right place, right time, and knew the right people to set up his easel and paint the subjects that he loved. But there were obviously lots of official war artists, but I'm not sure that Mars is celebrated as being one of those. Am I right with that, Phil?
Yes, he wasn't. No, he didn't. That wasn't his role. He used his ability, draftsmanship, as a reconnaissance officer. So he would be sent out in advance to pinpoint where the German positions were. So I think in the Imperial War Museum, there are examples of his work where, I think they were they were pieced together, they were 6 foot. But that was a very important role. And it was for that he was, he was incredibly brave, because he was going ahead of the regiment, and for that bravery he was decorated by the French and the English, so it wasn't an official role that he was, he wasn't there to paint. He had a sort of a slightly different role, but he was the official painter at the coronation of Her Majesty the Queen, and his role in recording the funeral of George VI was also an official role.
Okay, and one of my favourite pieces, and this just shows how shallow I am, really. I love the cover of the Vogue magazine, and it's the silver jubilee of George V, I believe.
That's right.
And I know Cecil Beaton also produced a drawing or a painting for the cover of Vogue, and that's quite unusual, isn't it, or quite spectacular?
Well, I think Vogue did commission artists to do covers, and again, I think obviously Mars was invited to record the celebration of King George V's Jubilee in 1935, and it made a very good cover.
It did. It made a splendid cover. It did indeed. And what was his favoured medium? What did he use for the most part in his painting?
Well, this is where Phil, you actually went to where they were made. It was most certainly pastel. I think you're probably most qualified to talk about it because you've been to.
Yes. So Mars met Edouard Vuillard, a great impressionist artist in London, actually, in 1932, on a visit that Vuillard made to London, and they struck up a great friendship. I think Mars struck up great friendships with everyone he met, but particularly with Vuillard, who really, really admired Mars as a man and also as an artist. And and he really thought that Mars's style of work, very much on plein air, very quick, very would really suit pastel. And so he took Mars to meet Henri Rocher, the pastel maker at La Maison du Pastel in Paris, in about 1934, I think. And that really, it really was Mars's medium. He became a master of it. But amazingly, I think Mars recalled the occasion, and he said it was taken by God to meet God. So the veneration was there on both sides. But yes, and it really suited his style. And when you come to the exhibition, in the final room, the at-home room, with his lovely pastels of Jessie, really in the manner of Degas and Vuillard and Bonnard, that sort of very intimiste, but very, very subtle, but there was an amazing palette, because of course they had so much choice in the colors. So yeah.
There is a tiny box of pastels on display. Why?
Well, really,
special.
Yes, I mean they came from so Mars's granddaughter Jeanne Mars inherited Mars's amazing drawers of pastel, and she very kindly lent them, because we really felt that we needed to show an example of what pastel was, and these pastels were ones that came from Mars's own collection. And actually Jeanne uses them to this day. She's an artist, and she's really mastered the medium as well. And we have an example of her work in the exhibition, which is rather special.
And there are some paintings also by Winston Churchill, aren't there?
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
Mainly from Blenheim, and also at the Saint Georges Motel, where they painted together. Yes.
Yeah, excellent. Because I love that. I think Winston's painting of Saint Georges Motel is stunning, and then there's a lovely one by Mars of Winston painting there. It's just fantastic, really.
It's really nice, that room, to have the two artists sort of literally side by side with their work, and to have them juxtaposed like that, it is really lovely.
It is. And again, it's, you mentioned Mars's granddaughter, and of course there is a family collection, because I always have to wear my Blenheim hat whenever I chat to anyone. It's always about Blenheim for me. And of course there is a very close relationship between Jean Mars, and the Spencer Churchill family. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, so it's quite remarkable. So Jeanne is actually married to Robert Spencer Churchill, whose father was Ivor Spencer Churchill, who was Consuelo Vanderbilt's son.
Yeah, absolutely. So he was also Churchill's cousin.
Absolutely. And so they met actually at, so Paul Mars had an exhibition when he was 90 at the Wildenstein Gallery in London, and Jeanne was there, and that's where she met Robert, who became her husband 2 years later. So it is quite remarkable.
That's lovely. I love a little bit of romance in there as well. I think
Paul would have loved that too.
He died.
No, he went to their wedding.
Oh, good.
Yes, he went to their wedding. Yeah.
Yeah, good. Okay, now you mentioned that some of the paintings in the exhibition belong to the Blenheim collection, and where did you manage to source everything else from?
All over, really. a lot of detective work, looking through sale catalogues and trying to track down work that had maybe been up at auction, and also looking at public collections. And then I think word got out a little bit, didn't it, Phil? So then it got to the point where we'd selected a few, and then people started to approach us with potential loans as well, which is really nice. So we were then in the lucky position of really selecting what really contributed to the story of the exhibition.
Excellent. And was there anything that you had in mind that you would have liked but haven't been able to source this time round?
Well, I think there were always pictures that you think, well, it would be fantastic to have that. And I think there were a couple of paintings which we were trying to track down, but were probably in America, that we didn't quite get to, did we, Phil?
Yes, and there was one painting that had been, it was a sort of a real collaboration between multiple artists, that was painted at the Saint Georges Motel, and it was Paul Mars and somebody called Simon Levy, and I think Ivor might have even painted a bit of it, and it was a real collaboration, and it was sold at Sotheby's, I think bought by Roald Dahl, and then sold again, and we couldn't quite track that one down, but that would have been a wonderful wonderful painting to have had.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. But I mean, having said that, I think you've done pretty well. So, I don't think there's any need to beat yourselves up about it. I'm going to ask you this in turn. So, Lizzie, do you have a favourite painting in the exhibition? And if so, which one?
It's interesting because I love lots of them for different reasons, but I do have a favourite, and it's one of the smallest ones, and it's by Paul Mars, and it's The Day That War Was Declared. And it's a little pastel, and it's probably one of the smallest pictures in the exhibition, as I've just said. And it was, as the title kind of describes, it was painted by Paul when he was at the Saint Georges Motel painting alongside Churchill, and it was the work that he was painting when a messenger came to them saying that war was declared. And if you watch the film, Mars says in that film that Churchill turned to him and said, if I were you, I'd carry on painting because it might be the last one you do for quite some time. So it's a very poignant piece, and it's all inscribed on the backboard about how they left as quickly as they could and got one of the last ships back to England. So it feels like a piece of history when you look at that, and very important history.
Yeah, absolutely. And Philippa, you've had a moment now to consider.
Yes. Well, yes. It's like it's impossible. Like asking a parent who your favourite child is. My favourite is probably Armistice Day at La Place Vendôme, which Paul Mars painted on the first Armistice Day back in 1918. He'd been shot actually in the wrist in that September, and had been invalided out really, and so he was recuperating in Le Havre, and then in November went to Paris, obviously to be part of this amazing auspicious day. And the fact that he chose the Place Vendôme, I think, is no accident at all. I think, it's on the start of the Rue de la Paix. The victory column was Napoleon I's, victory column. And, he's got the tricolor, and but there is a moodiness to it. There is that jubilation, but at the same time, you do get this sense of this, this loss, that the fact that there was so much sadness. There is a poignancy in it. But no, that I think that is my favorite painting.
Well, I also have a favorite. And I'm sure you'd love to know what it is.
Yes, please do share.
I will share to find out. Yeah.
So my favourite is the one, and again, it's the story behind it for me, and it's the one that Paul Mars drew on the South Lawn at Blenheim, and drew on the back of a wrapper for his new box of pastels, and he drew it for the butler, and left it in the butler's pigeonhole. And I just think it's such a delightful story. And it's superb. And I think you mentioned earlier how he just used to whip off a quick picture. that epitomises it for me.
And it is, and it doesn't look like, I mean, it really is a fully worked up piece, isn't it? It's lovely, of the south face of Blenheim Palace.
No,
and he was painting with Churchill at the time as well.
Yes, exactly. So it has all the elements. It's it's probably not as technically beautiful or as pretty as some of them, but
I think the fact that it exists now is still yes, it's wonderful too. That there it was done on a wrapper for a pastel box, and the butler really treasured it, and it's been handed down.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I think really we're so lucky. The exhibition is on until November. So I think if you're listening to this, and I hope you've enjoyed our conversation, but do come and see it. It's absolutely stunning. What next for you ladies?
Oh, I'm just taking a breather.
Well deserved.
Yes, Lizzie, no, who knows what next? Hopefully another exciting exhibition, but who knows? Excellent.
And Lizzie, how about you?
There's always a lot of projects and a lot of exhibitions. So I think we opened 4 in June this year, just between the gallery and our other projects. So watch this space.
Yeah, lovely. Well, thank you so much for giving up your time. And as I say, do come and see the exhibition. It's absolutely stunning, not to be missed.